Hi, David Ellenstein here, Artistic Director of North Coast Repertory Theater. Thank you for tuning in today to our theater conversations. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. That would help us out a lot. Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us today. And I'm excited to be chatting today with my friend and colleague, Debby Buchholz. Debby is the managing director of the La Jolla Playhouse and has been for the last few years. Before that, she was the general manager of the La Jolla Playhouse for a long time. And prior to that, at a different point in her life, she was the general counsel for the Kennedy Center in Washington, because she is a Harvard-educated lawyer as well as the mother of 3 amazing girls, which is actually how we initially met, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Hi, Debby.
Hi, David. How are you?
Thanks for doing this today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So like me, you grew up in LA, right?
I did. The West San Fernando Valley.
Where in the valley?
Woodland Hills.
Woodland Hills, where it gets really hot.
Anywhere in the valley, it gets very hot.
It's true. It's true. So how did you end up ending up in the theater? How did that happen?
Well, I think largely growing up in Los Angeles, where almost everybody is in some way involved in the theater. So whether you were in the theater or whether your parents, drove the food and beverage truck for movies, or I mean, in some way, more Hollywood than theater, but television and film, everybody had some family member that was involved in some way, particularly kind of out in the valley, because you were a little bit further drive from Hollywood. And so everybody could afford to live there. And so, we had a really great theater program in my high school, and everybody, and it was the thing to do. I mean, it was very much the thing that people just did. And I had a great program and I loved it. And I had a family that, was positive about going to the theater. And so, I thought, well, you can't make a living in it, so I'll go to law school and do something legal or political or something that I can then still dabble in the theater in some way. And I did learn that all of, my friends from high school, everyone sort of stayed it in some way. Nobody stayed being an actor. You're kind of the exception to the rule, David, but they stayed either as fundraisers or casting directors or dramaturgs. There were so many careers in the theater that when you're in high school, you don't know that they exist. And so most of my high school peers and college peers actually did stay in the theater or in the industry in some way. And I just decided to be a lawyer, and then I backed back into it.
So were you a performer in high school too?
I was.
I
was terrible.
What plays did you do?
We did The Crucible. I was Elizabeth Proctor.
There you go.
We did Midsummer. I was Mustard Seed.
Yes.
And the student director. And then every year we did a musical. And after the first musical, it became very clear that my role should be the student director, because I was a very good person at organizing where everybody should be at any time and what had to go where. But I was a terrible dancer and a horrible singer. So I was the student director for the musicals, for Carousel and Can. And
so you appreciate all those people who do it well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you went to UCSD for undergrad, is that right?
I did. I was a poli-sci major, and then went to law school.
Law school at Harvard, and then out of Harvard, where did you go? Did you go right to Washington or somewhere else?
No, I practiced law in New York for a few years, for a law firm that actually did a lot of pro bono work for theaters in New York, for small nonprofit theaters in New York. The managing partner was a man named Arthur Kramer, and his brother was Larry Kramer, the playwright. And so there was an enormous commitment to theatrical pro bono work, which was one of the reasons I chose the firm. And then we moved to Washington. My husband joined the first Bush administration as an economist. And I figured out in Washington that all of my friends from law school had jobs that were way more fun than I had. I was doing municipal bond financing, which is about as much fun as it sounded, to be perfectly honest. And I was very lucky. I met the chairman of the Kennedy Center when he was looking sort of for an executive assistant who was, as he put it, he was looking for a young numerate lawyer who had an interest in the arts. And that's kind of what I was. I was a little deal closer. And so I went in and we moved, and we helped him move projects along, and then ended up in the counsel's office and as their employed lawyer. Which was a great job.
And then how did you end up making the transition to La Jolla Playhouse and to San Diego?
Well, at some point we had 3 children, and
3 great children.
They just 3 fabulous children, and schlepping them across the country every 6 or 8 weeks with all of our family living on the West Coast at a certain point just got to be exhausting. And so after our 3rd daughter was born and the house that we had been renting was going to go up for sale, we had to sort of make a decision. We either had to stop saying someday we would move to California, or we had to just move to California and buy a house in DC, or we had to move to California. And so we did, and it was actually the week before Labor Day of 2001. So we moved out here less than 2 weeks before September 11th.
Wow.
And landed in Solana Beach. And I'd love to say we landed in Solana Beach because right down the street was North Coast Rep, but we accidentally landed in Solana Beach and then happily discovered North Coast Rep not too far away when we went to the Vons. And we have happily lived in Solana Beach, going to the Vons and North Coast Rep for the last 18 years.
Which is awesome. When did you start at La Jolla Playhouse?
In 2002, about a year after we moved.
Okay. And were they just looking for somebody and you applied and it happened, or did you have connections there, or?
I was really lucky. I took a few months to sort of acclimate, and then my family told me I really needed to go back to work. And one of my trustees at the Kennedy Center was very good friends with one of the board members at the Playhouse. And so they connected me, and after a series of conversations, she was connected at the Playhouse and at the Symphony and a few other cultural institutions. And I said, I just wanted to work in a cultural institution. I didn't want to take the California bar. I didn't think that any of the San Diego cultural institutions could afford an employed lawyer. That just wasn't a logical choice. So something in a management job was what I was going to look for. And she sent my resume to the managing director at the Symphony and to the managing director at the Playhouse. And it was right when the Playhouse was in the end of the capital campaign and getting ready to build the buildings that now are the Potiker Theater, the Kaplan Administration Building, and our rehearsal space. And he needed somebody who could sort of run a company while he finished fundraising and getting buildings built. So I got hired as the general manager and have happily stayed ever since. If you see my office, you'll understand that it would take a lot to excavate.
I understand. Have you ever seen mine? You can't. You almost can't get in the door. So you were general manager for quite a few years, and general manager meaning you were basically overseeing operations and making sure everything was going smoothly. Is that accurate?
Yes. It was human resources, all of the contracting. I mean, it's sort of the legal background lent itself to doing all of the contracts. So, for a long time, the Playhouse has done a lot of agreements with commercial producers to help produce, new musicals that we do. And so right. That skill set, I did all that. We also negotiate some union agreements on our own with the musicians union and things like that. So there was a fair amount of what I already knew how to do that I brought to that.
And then a couple of years ago, you became the managing director of the organization. How did your duties change? Do you have a general manager that does what you did, or did you just take on more?
Well, for the first 6 or 8 months, I took on a lot more. It turns out they are 2 completely separate jobs. But at the same time, I think in theater, a lot of times, particularly in nonprofit theater, you end up with somebody who has a certain set of skills and you don't want to lose those skills. So you often tailor the job around that, and then you fill in where you have need. So a lot of general managers in regional theater come up through production management side or through one of the management training programs. And so they have some real deep production knowledge, which I didn't have. And so my role as general manager actually didn't involve supervising the production manager at all, because I couldn't have done his job, I think is the best, or her job at the time, as the case was. On the other hand, no regional theater really needs a skill set of the contract negotiation skills. You don't need two people who can do that.
Right.
So when when we were looking for a new general manager, we changed the job description slightly so
Right.
that it filled in the gaps of what I then no longer had, I think is the best way to put it.
So you're our neighbor in Solana
am.
Beach,
Yes.
and you work at our big sister theater a little bit south. But your three daughters all attended theater school at North Coast Repertory Theater. Is that
Happily
right?
so, yes. No,
Happily so.
they had a fantastic introduction. I think it's one of the wonderful things about the North County, San Diego area. It, in its own way, reminds me in a lot of ways of the West San Fernando Valley, many years ago. I mean, it's getting a little bigger than that now, but 15 or 20 years ago when we were starting at all this, the ability for these kinds of arts programs, North Coast Rep has them, Christian Youth Theater has them, the Jewish Community Center has them. There's a really wonderful, and there are other, obviously, I'm only naming a couple that are right here in North County, but there are these great youth training programs that aren't necessarily, you could be training to go and be a professional, but it's really about helping kids develop social and speaking skill sets that they're going to take with them for the rest of their lives, whether or not they ever choose any kind of a career in theater, in front of on stage, behind the stage, whatever. My kids learn so much in improv classes and Shakespeare classes, and just the parts that the classes where you put together a production as well. To me, those are a little bit less important, but so important because they teach you that every part of a team is an integral part of a team. And so, to me, theater classes are about team building, about confidence building, and the classes at North Coast Rep were key. My eldest daughter went to law school also, and I think was very much informed by her North Coast Rep classes in terms of just being confident in being able to be a public speaker and in decision making and in team building, all of the things that I think a company makes you.
And you're talking about Victoria, who I also remember was a really good writer.
Thank you. Yes.
I remember she wrote a couple of things that were very, very impressive.
Thank you. No, she is. She's a great writer and decided pretty quickly after a production or two, she really wasn't interested in being a performer, but she enjoyed all the aspects of putting, team building. And I think it's just such a microcosm for so many other things that you can do in life that may have absolutely nothing to do with the theater.
So Debbie, what were the experiences that you had when you were younger in the theater that made you get excited about this being a career, that made you really happy that this is what you're doing? Did you see a particular production that made you sit up and take notice, or did you have an experience yourself?
I think sort of yes, sort of no. So I don't think it was so much the experiences that I had when I loved being part of that team. Do you know what I mean? I really did love the people that I was friendly with. I loved theater people. They were a little bit weird and quirky and slightly different and a little less judgy. And, I grew up in the West San Fernando Valley where, think about Mean Girls and all of those high school girl stereotypes. And I think growing up and going and doing theater in high school sort of removed me, and I've seen it remove other girls, particularly, but not just girls, but other girls and boys and everything in between, and kids who are not like all of the stereotypes, and find a comfortable place for them. And that I appreciated, that it was just, you could be whoever you were in that spot. And I think that's what I liked about it. And so in college and in law school, I still participated in theater, not with any intent of doing it professionally, but just that was what I wanted to do rather than play a sport or whatever my other extracurricular was. That was always my extracurricular because it was a community that I liked.
Yeah.
And so, the things that are really meaningful to me now as I watch, as I participate in theater and putting things, I love first rehearsals because we do so much new work. I love the first rehearsal. I love I love the invited dress. I love those first moments when either the company comes together for the first time as a company, or when an audience, which also is almost like its own little company together, realizes that they're hearing or seeing or participating in something for the first time. And like every couple of years, there's that amazing moment of, oh my God, this is why I do what I do. So
Yeah, that's great. So not to slight any of the shows that you guys have done, but when you think about your 19 years, what 2 or 3 just jump to your mind and go, this, we were on top of the world. This is what it was about.
So you're not supposed to have favorite children. Jersey Boys was the first musical I ever was part of putting together, and I had no idea.
Wait,
Pardon?
Debbie, what was that show called? I never heard of that.
You don't want me to sing from it, so just take my word for it. I didn't realize that first rehearsals weren't all like the first rehearsal of Jersey Boys, and that moment of coming together and watching something get written in a room, and watching when somebody whose life is being portrayed walk into the room and participate in it. It was this blending of life and art that was beautiful, and I love that. I think honestly, the most amazing moment for me in theater at all in the last 19 years was the opening night of Come From Away on Broadway, where there's this moment at the end, during the development of it, you know, the show would end, they'd come out, they'd do their curtain call, and that was it. And there was this feeling in the audience that they just weren't ready to be done yet. And so through previews, the team wrote a little bit of a concert. So by the time it opened at the Playhouse, Come From Away ended with this little, about 5-minute little concert of sort of Irish themed Newfoundlander music that happens at the end, which sort of gives the audience an opportunity to get up and really say how much they love the show, because there's no intermission and there are moments of tension and all of that. So the opening night at Broadway, the cast took their bow and then walked off stage, and it wasn't as fulfilling as everybody. It was like they were, and then they walked back on, and they were all holding the hands of the people who they portrayed in the show. And there was this moment where there was this almost silence in the house, where, because nobody, like, it took a moment for people to realize what had just happened. And then, like, if you had lit a match, the entire theater would have just exploded, because it couldn't get any louder, but it did. I mean, it was just, and people were crying, and it was this blending of life and making theater. And you were in that room in the moment where you recognized that, the people recognized that they were in this weird once in a lifetime moment. And the love that they were sort of pouring out was, you know, not only for these actors who had just given this spectacular performance, but for those real people on stage who had taken care of 7,500 people who'd come from away, you know, and landed in their little town and stayed.
That's great, and I love both of those shows, Jersey Boys and Come From Away. I thought they were both awesome. But what some people who don't go to La Jolla Playhouse or don't live in this area who don't know is La Jolla Playhouse also does new dramas and all kinds of other plays. And I'll tell you, for me, I've come to quite a few things at La Jolla Playhouse. I think whenever I think of La Jolla Playhouse, the first thing that comes to my mind, believe it or not, is an Iliad.
Oh, I could see that.
And Henry Warnitz and that cello, and just the two of them doing that incredible work. And it wasn't a big audience the night I was there, but boy, it was a night I'll never forget, because I thought it was great. So you guys do a wide, I mean, you do the big musicals that go to Broadway and all that, but you also do dramatic new works too.
So in that vein, one of my and this was before I worked there. Yeah. One of my very favorite shows was A Walk in the Woods. And it was such an amazing pleasure to see it. I won't say how many years later again. And that the second time I saw it was with you and your production. And I would say that your production of it and your portrayal in it and the beautiful intimacy of your little stage made it was such a joy to share with my girls, you know, that many years later, and where the political import of it is so important. I mean, I love what you're saying, because what it highlights is how important nonprofit theater is, because though A Walk in the Woods is actually an exception, and Iliad is a better example of work that if the box office needed to pay for it, it wouldn't get done. And yet it's so important to our national storytelling and identity to be able to tell stories that not necessarily are going to be commercially viable.
Right. Yeah. That's why we're nonprofit, right? So that we can put on stuff that isn't necessarily going to pay the bills. And if you can couple it with doing what you guys do, where you can put on a big show that ends up going on to make money, that's great too. But the subsidy and the reason we're nonprofits is so that we can do those ones that may not have that broad appeal, but yet are so important to get done.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have other ones that like that you've seen other places maybe around? I mean, Debbie, you're so busy. I mean, you're managing director. You're a mom of 3, but you're also what's your title with LORT?
I'm the vice president.
The vice president. LORT, for those of you who don't know, is the League of, is it resident or regional? Because I know it's changed over the years.
Right. It's resident in the term, because the idea is that people should be able to live and work in a community that isn't, people should be able to make theater in a community that isn't New York or Los Angeles necessarily, and to be able to live in that community as well. So
the League of Resident Theaters is the organization that represents most of the larger theaters in the United States, and you're the vice president. What does that entail? And what do you guys do at LORT?
What it is it's a trade association that collectively bargains with 3 unions, a set of union agreements that we all work by. But that's what it was when it started in the 1960s. And since then, what it's become, in addition to an entity that collectively bargains with the Actors Union, the Director and Choreographer Union, and the Scenic Designers Union, is really a collaborative of theaters, all nonprofit theaters, who also help train and support each other. So we do a lot of co-producing amongst ourselves. We help train, we do a lot of mentoring. And then there's a fair amount of interpreting contracts and preparing for collective bargaining as well. So we have a lot of committees. So those of us that produce musicals end up giving a lot of advice to those of us that don't produce musicals but wish that we did, or getting into the business of it, things like that. It's a lovely and you do find, and I'm sure whether you're a LORT member or not, and whether you're a nonprofit theater maker or whether you're a for-profit theater maker, it's a group of very special people, and it's a relatively small world, and generally made up of people who tend to be sharing and collaborative.
And as you well know, we're going to be doing a new musical at North Coast, and I've already leaned on you. We've already leaned on your expertise a bit, and who knows, there might be another call or two. Debbie, help! We don't know what to do.
So long as you don't want me to sing, dance, or play an instrument or direct it, I'm happy to give you my expertise.
Okay. Well, I first met you. I met you first as a patron at North Coast Rep and as a mom of our theater school students. Little did I know that you were as entrenched in the same business that I was. We became friends, and I'm so glad that we are. And I miss having lunch with you, which we'll do again once we can, and getting together with Todd. We haven't seen Todd now in a while, so we all have to do this.
Don't tell anyone, but he's sporting a beard that's looking a little bit like yours, but it's going to go soon.
Is it as gray as mine?
Yes.
Uh-oh.
But nobody's ever going to see it, so.
Okay. Well, thanks for doing this. I'm sure that everybody is going to be really interested to hear your perspective, because it's not a perspective that people who go to the theater think about very much, what the managing director does and how they go about their business. So thanks for doing this today, and I want to see you soon.